It started the moment I unlocked the front door and heard my son shout from upstairs, "Dad, did you change the password again?" Except I hadn't. In fact, I hadn't touched the router since last Tuesday, right before we left for that ill-fated weekend trip. At first, I thought it was just a glitch. Maybe the ISP acting up, maybe a loose cable, but when the smart lock didn't sync, the thermostat was blank, and every single camera feed read offline, I knew something was very wrong. Still, it wasn't until Leo came sprinting down the stairs in his socks, laptop under his arm and worry on his face, that I understood we weren't just dealing with a technical issue. "Someone hijacked our whole network," he said, eyes flicking across lines of code like he was reading a thriller. "And they're bouncing the signal 2 houses over, to Karen's place." I blinked. Karen. The HOA president. The one who fined us for our front lawn being too expressive last fall. The one who had reported our mailbox for being off-center by 2 inches. The woman who knocked on our door last month just to scold me for having 2 solar panels not approved by the HOA bylaws. That Karen. I should have known. She always acted like she ran the street, but apparently now she'd decided she also ran our Wi-Fi. Leo, only 17 but sharper than most IT guys I've worked with, was already isolating IPs, running network sweeps, and logging all unknown connections. He called it digital pest control. I followed him to the modem tucked behind the living room shelf, and sure enough, all our smart home systems had been remotely overridden. "She used our system as a ghost router," he said. "But she got sloppy. Didn't hide the MAC address of the repeater she installed." Apparently, a small, egg-sized repeater device had been set up somewhere near the back fence, within signal range, tunneling our data to Karen's guesthouse. At that point, my mild irritation turned into a rolling boil of disbelief. Who does that? Who taps into someone else's private internet, reroutes it across a fence, and then acts like it's no big deal? Karen, of course. But Leo wasn't just annoyed, he was quietly furious. "You know what's crazy?" he said, dragging files into a zip folder. "She didn't just use our internet. She accessed our system and tried to install a remote admin tool. That's not freeloading. That's hacking." And suddenly, the stakes had changed. This wasn't about a few extra gigabytes. It was about control. About privacy. About how someone like Karen believed she was entitled to our space, our systems, even our bandwidth. Leo changed the Wi-Fi password and the network name. What used to be FranklinNet was now something new and very public. "Stop stealing, Karen." He grinned as he pressed enter. "If she wants to play dumb, let's make it harder for her." Within 2 hours, she was at our door. No knock. Just the kind of pounding that makes your spine straighten. I opened it and was greeted by her usual expression, somewhere between fake concern and simmering rage. "Hi there," she said, eyes flicking toward the roofline like she was inspecting it for violations. "Just wondering if there's a reason your internet name is targeted?" She said the word like it was a personal attack. "Seems a bit aggressive for our community." I didn't say anything. Just crossed my arms and let her fill the silence. She launched into a ramble about how her guests had been having connection issues and how, sometimes routers can accidentally link to neighboring homes, but Leo wasn't having it. He stepped forward, calm and polite, holding a printout of our network log with her device ID circled in red. "Your tablet was connected to our network for 7 days straight," he said. "Through a repeater hidden under a patio chair. We found it." She blinked. For once, speechless. Then her face contorted in a way I can only describe as HOA malfunction, like her system couldn't process being confronted. "I'll speak to the board about this harassment," she spat, then turned and walked off with stiff, robotic steps. But the best part wasn't her exit. It was what happened next. That night, after Leo resecured our firewall and I poured myself a glass of wine, we noticed something strange. Our camera feed, the one that had been offline, was showing a live image of Karen's backyard. "That's not possible," I said. Leo paused. Unless. He clicked through settings, then froze. Dad, she was using our network to offload security footage from her house. We were receiving her own camera feed. Karen had been uploading backups through our internet, and now that we'd kicked her off, the software defaulted back to us. Want to see something weird? Leo asked, pulling up an archived video. It showed a late-night gathering in her backyard. Not a barbecue, not a social visit, but Karen, 3 men in suits, and a bunch of HOA binders being passed around like secret dossiers. One of the men handed her an envelope. Another pointed toward our house. The footage ended. I sat back slowly, my stomach tight. What the hell are they hiding? Leo didn't answer. He just opened a folder labeled Karen_HOA. It was the first time I realized this wasn't just petty neighbor drama. This was something bigger. Something we were never meant to see. And it all started with a stolen Wi-Fi signal and a son who refused to let it slide. The next morning started like most others, except now we had a folder full of suspicious surveillance footage and a Wi-Fi network name that had officially declared war on our HOA president. Leo was already up before me, eyes bloodshot but focused, tapping away at his laptop like he was working for the FBI. He'd been combing through everything Karen's rogue devices had funneled into our system before we cut her off. There were video clips, document previews, cached email headers, and a strange folder labeled Vendor Reports _Alt. The deeper he dug, the stranger it got. One clip, time-stamped 3:42 a.m., showed Karen wheeling a dolly full of file boxes across her backyard in her bathrobe. Another showed her meeting a man in a maintenance vest at the community center, except the man's face had been deliberately blurred out in the footage, as if someone had tampered with the file. Meanwhile, I tried to go about my normal Saturday chores, but I couldn't shake the tension that had settled in the house. It was like we'd accidentally opened a door that had always been there, just hidden under coats and umbrellas, and now we couldn't look away. That afternoon, Leo explained something I didn't quite understand but definitely found unnerving. She wasn't just using our internet for streaming or spying, he said, adjusting his glasses. She had set up a mirrored network to store data. It wasn't just passive use. She was actively redirecting backups from her devices into a hidden cloud directory hosted under our IP address. Why? I asked, still confused. So it couldn't be traced back to her. If someone subpoenaed her logs, they'd see our house as the access point. The implication landed like a rock in my stomach. So if she was doing something illegal, it'd look like we were doing it, he finished. And just like that, the stakes doubled again. I didn't want to jump to conclusions. I wasn't the kind of guy who immediately assumed criminal conspiracy every time Karen issued a new garbage day violation. But now I couldn't ignore what was in front of us. Leo pulled up a spreadsheet file he decrypted earlier that morning. The file was titled Lakeview Project, Adjusted Penalties and Votes. At first glance, it looked like typical HOA bureaucracy, boring rows and columns of neighbor addresses, violation codes, fine amount. But Leo pointed to a column labeled Override Justification, which was filled with identical phrases like Board Approval, Emergency Clause, and Retroactive Adjustment, HOA Authority. And the fines weren't small. Some families had been charged thousands for things like garden gnomes, wrong window shutters, parking on their own driveway too long. I recognized several names from around the neighborhood. People who had complained during HOA meetings only to be dismissed, or worse, silenced by Karen's infamous decorum violation clause. She's been using the HOA like her own ATM, I said slowly. Leo nodded. And manufacturing vote results to make it look legitimate. That's when he showed me something even more disturbing, a document trail that suggested Karen had appointed people to the board who didn't even live in the neighborhood. Shell names. 2 were relatives. One was listed as interim treasurer, even though we didn't have a treasurer position in our HOA. Suddenly, I remembered a quiet older man named Gus who used to live 2 doors down. He was fined over a dozen times in 6 months for things that never made sense: an illegal tool shed that turned out to be a gardening bench, a non-compliant fence that was installed 10 years earlier with original HOA approval. He eventually sold and moved out, saying he couldn't afford to stay. It had always bothered me. Now it felt like a part of something bigger. Karen had been weaponizing the HOA not just for control, but for financial gain. I walked out onto the porch, needing air, and waved at Janet, our next-door neighbor. She waved back politely, but there was a tension in her smile I hadn't noticed before. I found myself walking over. "Janet," I said, "can I ask you something weird?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Did you ever get fined for something that didn't make sense?" Her eyes immediately dropped. She looked around to make sure no one was listening. "Yeah," she said quietly. 2 years ago. They said my flower pots were improperly aligned. Did you fight it?" I tried. "But then they fined me again, for unauthorized confrontation during a board meeting. I just gave up." She looked tired, like she'd been holding it in too long. "Why do you ask?" I debated how much to tell her. Finally I said, "Because Karen's been doing more than overreaching. We found proof she's been rerouting fines, manipulating board votes, and using fake board members." Janet's face changed from confusion to rage in half a second. "I knew it," she said through her teeth. "I told my husband it didn't add up, but he said not to rock the boat." "Would you be willing to talk to others about it?" I asked. "We're collecting evidence." Quietly. Carefully. She hesitated, then gave a small, determined nod. "Yes. Absolutely yes." Back at the house, Leo had built a clean, separate network just for analysis. He called it Sandbox_Karen. His programming hobby had taken on a new life. He was now running scripts to identify every file Karen had pushed through our system, matching them with timestamps and flagging duplicates. "Dad," he said later that night, "you remember the backyard camera feed from yesterday?" I nodded. "There's a pattern. Every time Karen has one of those late-night meetings, the next day there's an email sent from her account to the city development office. Usually about zoning. Zoning for what? Construction projects. Expanding HOA jurisdiction. Sometimes even property annexation. All under the guise of safety or community beautification." I stared at him. "She's planning a land grab?" "More like an empire," he said. "And our neighborhood is just the beginning." The next day, I printed out the network logs and redacted footage to bring to my friend Terry, who used to be on the board before Karen squeezed him out. He was skeptical at first, but once he saw the packet captures and the spreadsheet with falsified fines, his jaw clenched. "She's gone too far," he muttered. "I knew she was shady, but this is criminal." And that's when he told me something that made my stomach twist. "Karen's cousin works in the zoning office. I bet she's been feeding him fake violations to justify land repurposing. She gets grants. He gets a cut. Everyone else gets screwed." As I drove back home, my mind raced with possibilities. We weren't just dealing with a power-hungry neighbor. We were dealing with someone who had built an entire scheme on top of her neighborhood throne, manipulating documents, relationships, and networks like it was her own little kingdom. But she'd made one mistake. She messed with Leo's internet. And now she'd woken up something she wouldn't be able to silence with a fake fine or HOA decorum clause. Leo had already started phase 2 of his plan. A quiet takedown. One file at a time. Karen might have thought the password change was the end of her problem, a passive-aggressive slap on the wrist that she could brush off with some boardroom smirks and a new violation notice. But what she didn't realize, what she never counted on, was that Leo wasn't wired like the rest of us. He didn't do things halfway, didn't let go when something didn't add up. After we connected the zoning changes to her midnight meetings, he spent 2 straight evenings scouring metadata, piecing together logs from the back door she had tried to install on our router. And buried in that mess of encrypted backups and suspicious activity was a compressed file that stopped both of us cold. It was named HOA